Okay. Let me delete these three videos. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, this will probably go out while I'm talking about it, but that's one of my favorite. I'm not a rich man, so this is like the most expensive pipe that I ever bought outright, and it was on sale when I bought it. But this is my Stainwell, fantastic pipe. Everybody likes it, comments on it, and I got this. I'm still smoking on the same batch of pipe tobacco I bought like 2 months ago now, and then I like the Newminster 403 or 408. It's like a bullseye flake with some Kentucky dark fired or bold strong to Kentucky type stuff in it. It also has, it seems like it has a lot of Virginias. It's kind of like pretty sharp on the tongue. So for me, just that means smoking it in one of the better pipes that I got that can really handle this type of tobacco, and smoking it very cool. Okay, and then it's enjoyable. If you smoke it hot, I mean, if you like tongue bite, some people do. I don't mind it too much. If you like a little bit of tongue bite, smoke it hot. It's pretty spicy. Probably has some perique in it. I don't know. Maybe it would be considered a vapor, but it's like Newminster 403 or 408, something like that. And then I got Irish Flake. There is one basically tobacco store type store that for now has some pipe tobacco in it. It is one of the better cigar stores down here in South Florida. It's on SR Marina Mile Road area, or is it SR 17? SR 17 at US 1, just south of Fort Lauderdale. It's called Cigar Superstore. It's one of the only places in South Florida you're going to find any quality type pipe tobacco and any pipe products to speak of. Pipes have just become too much of a niche product. I think that the business models of some of these companies is fine. It's going to be competitive, but they got a very niche market. So we'll see. I could see, the pipe tobacco industry contracting, which I loathe, because I really like good quality pipe tobacco, usually non-aromatic. But the idea of being a mail order, internet order type of business nowadays works better than having local stores. Cigars have a wider appeal, so you can have places that sell a lot of cigars. I got a liquor store right down the street from my house that is fantastic. They have a nice little humidor. They got they're kind of hit or miss with keeping up a good selection. But they mostly keep up a good selection. I noticed that Padron Naturals were kind of hard to come by at the moment. Although I did find them at the vape shop down the street. But anyway, but with the pipe tobacco, the only place I know of that has anything of consequence is going to be Cigar Superstore on US 1 and SR 17. And I think, who knows how much longer they're going to have that pipe section. They bought the other half of the property, and they turned it into something. They're doing something with it, and for now they have pipe products. So I plan on going there, spending the extra money once in a while, just to keep the pipe stuff going. I mean, for me, buying a $20 tin once every couple months, that's what I'm talking about. Otherwise, I don't smoke a whole lot of pipe tobacco. It's more of an occasional thing. I used to smoke, though. I've had off and ons where I've smoked 3 pipes a day or a couple pipes, a cigar a day. Anyway, I'm already getting off track, but that's what I'm smoking. That's my pipe. And I would, listen, there's nothing wrong with pipe tobacco. Take it from somebody who has never shied away from harmful substances and has never shied away from taking it to the extreme with harmful substances. Take it from somebody, maybe you could tell pipe tobacco is innocuous. Now, if you're a health nut, then I don't blame you for not smoking pipe tobacco or cigars. But there's nothing wrong for a man. You know, let's not, I don't want to get sexist for here. You know, there are some women who can pull off smoking cigars, but that's mostly a man thing. You know, it's like, I think women, you know, they should do it in hiding. Just like men do certain things in hiding. Like we watch ice skating in hiding, so they can go smoke their cigars in hiding, all right? Is that sexist? I don't know. I'm already getting way off track here, but I wanted to talk about, let me pause it for a second and collect my thoughts. I'm going to be pausing this a lot. I'm probably going to remove my, maybe I'll keep the video up for now. You know, and maybe turn off my fan. And we're going to talk. I haven't done a video about Ukraine for a while, so I just wanted to say hi to, you know, all these private and public weirdo spook PR / intelligence / subversion / law enforcement institutions that we have in this country. It's getting they're really, they've been acting really weird lately. They're acting like they feel like they're losing their grip, and they're acting desperate, and they just need to chill out. It'll all be fine, spooks. Okay, we're not gonna, you know, go there and fire all of you tomorrow, so you don't have to freak out and just make things worse. But I just want to talk about Ukraine, okay? Because this is a very, like, people, you know, Americans don't want to know about Ukraine. Just like with Iraq, digging too deeply into what's going on in Ukraine would make most Americans feel rather guilty and rather upset if you know, if they actually, you know, did something other than sit in front of the TV and drool all over themselves and burn brain cells. If they actually learn, you know, especially the boomers, if the boomers actually learn to use a goddamn keyboard, okay, and stop being pathetic. And if you're going to be pathetic and watch TV and think you're going to use that as a source, a viable source, then just shut up. Just shut up. No one wants to hear your stupid 50-year-old opinions. Boomers want to send these young people to war, by the way. Boomers love war. They voted for nothing but war, since one can argue, at least the Clintons. All right. Maybe you can say Clinton was kind of on that borderline, but that NATO expansion started under the Clintons. And they've been voting for war ever since, from Clinton to Obama. Bush, the fucking worst one. Then Trump too. Okay, I'm you know, Trump too. Look, I got a soft spot for this guy, but I'm not going to sit here and be ahistorical and illiterate and say he's done nothing wrong. He's done a lot of shit wrong. I don't really want him to. I don't know. I don't know anymore. I'm kind of totally like, fuck the federal government anyways. I guess if he's going to run, he can run, but I don't see what good's going to come out of it. That's a different discussion for a different day. I just don't see it. I mean, the worst part is I don't see much good that could come out of any political figure or leader becoming president. I mean, the office of the executive has already pretty much gone rogue vis-a-vis the Constitution. In other words, they no longer respect or adhere to the Constitution in a meaningful way. They don't take orders from the president, whoever that president is. The president takes orders from some of these institutions that are embedded and entrenched in our political system. So I don't really give a goddamn who becomes president, honestly. I think we have two different paths that we're diverging along. Big history perspective here. Let's do a big history perspective. We got two divergent paths that the United States is diverging on. One path is decentralization, which would be the preferred path. Because decentralization, the only good that could come out of centralization, further centralization, at this point is a more tyrannical and abusive, coercive system. And so even though the decentralization path would be fraught with peril as well and painful to say the least, further centralization into an autocratic, we already are autocratic. We're on the spectrum. We're well on our way to the other end of the spectrum of autocracy. Let's just be clear. But of the two paths, one of which we will diverge down, I would pick the decentralization path. So I really don't give a rat's ass who the next president of the United States is. And I mean that from the fucking bottom of my heart. CIA, it doesn't mean don't fight it, CIA. We're not going to dismantle you. Just chill. And there won't be any problems. But the more you push back, the worse it's going to be for you. Because, see, the CIA understands it. Good intelligence officers understand this. History matters. It doesn't matter to the political parasites that run middle and upper management in all of these institutions, but it matters to the real bureaucrats, the hardcore institutionalists that really believe and want to make better institutions. They understand. A good analyst in the CIA understands the importance of history. There's never been a time in the CIA when people were not sticking to the truth in their analysis and acting with integrity at all times. That's never been the case. They just, at various periods in history, tend to get drowned out by the corrupt parasites that are sucking the lifeblood out of an entire civilization. So, CIA, look, let's decentralize. You can have still your CIA field offices. And it would be great because, you know, the field offices will have more autonomy and we can have a decentralized CIA. I don't think that wouldn't be beyond the realm of possibility. But some of these bureaucrats, they're so stuck on themselves. They don't understand that they can't fight the flow of history. They can't stop aggregate human behavior, because that's what history is. Aggregate human behavior over time. It is the study of aggregate human behavior, and I like to also add the behavior of individuals in positions that are high in the social hierarchy, i.e., powerful or influential in some way. So, I'm going to show, this is just how a good analyst in one of these agencies, preferably the DIA, but one of these agencies would look at a situation like Ukraine. I can guarantee you there is no shortage of analysts in any of the intelligence agencies who actually understand a lot more than what I'm going to say here. And they understand how they can use history to understand possible outcomes. But the vast majority of Americans, they don't have time to understand these things. And that's why they're so easy to fool and so easy to dupe, especially, going back to my boomer rant, especially the boomers. But this is common. This was the case during the Vietnam War. The older generations were all gung-ho about Vietnam, and it was the younger generations who were like, hold up. You know? And you had the older generations at the time, the silence, saying, oh, those kids with their goddamn reefer. And the young people were like, yo, y'all need to chill with this war shit. It's not cool. We don't want to go. We want to go do LSD in New York and San Francisco and have gay orgies, whatever. It was a very similar situation to what we have now. Perhaps now is in some ways more repressive than the environment that existed back then. Certainly politically, the anti-war movement has been ostracized and removed from the entrenched institutions of D.C. It no longer exists. Largely due to the fact that the Democrats abandoned the anti-war movement. No one ever thought the Republicans were going to embrace, nobody expected the Republicans to embrace the anti-war movement, but the anti-war movement would still exist were it not for the Democrats completely abandoning it under Obama. Because it was Obama who made it impossible to criticize the Democratic Party on their foreign policy, because if you criticized anything to do with the Obama administration, you were, in fact, racist. I remember talking to some NPR weirdos. I'm going to remove my, I'll keep the video capture on. I'm just going to keep pausing it, so I'm going to do like that. I don't know, what was that movie back in the day? I'm going to be doing that thing, the guy on the screen, the weird early 80s movie with the computer guy on the screen that did some weird stuttering. That's what I'm going to kind of look like. I wish I could add tracer effects to this or something. It's going to be a hell of a rant today, but I got things to get off my chest. So yeah. Coming from someone who worshipped Obama, I was like, let's go. This is a quick story. I was in a fucking hotel in Pennsylvania for work. There's going to be a lot of cursing. What does it matter to me? I was in a fucking hotel in Pennsylvania for work. 2014, 13, something like that. I worshipped Obama. I fucking worshipped him in 2007 and 2008. I went and voted for the first time and last time legitimately that I voted in my life was fucking Obama in 2008. And before that, that was the second time I legitimately and last voted was in 2008. And then the first time I legitimately voted in my life was straight Democrat ticket 2006, and I was the bleedingest of bleeding heart liberal types up until Obama woke me up, because I saw the bullshit first with his response to the 2008 financial crisis, continuing the poor policies of Bush, the Wall Street first policies of Bush, and even expanding upon them, and then starting to fuck with Julian Assange, and because of the State Department cables. You see, the difference between me and a fucking civilian is that I remember all these things like it was yesterday. For some reason, all the drugs I've done, that information has survived. Those brain cells are still in my brain. I don't know why that is. Then you have Edward Snowden after Julian Assange. Obama goes after both of them like he's fucking Bush. Just 3 years 4 years, let's say 5 years before, 2005, the Democrats were complaining that George, and I agreed 100%. This is why I was a Democrat. Democrats were complaining that George Bush was monitoring computers in the library. Now the Democrats would completely embrace that dangerous policy. There was some opposition in the Democrat Party to the Iraq War. There was some opposition to the Patriot Act in the Democrat Party. Very little, but there was still some notable opposition. But Obama came in with all his Wall Street first, CIA first, and there's a good reason why he did CIA first. IRS first, using the Lois Lerner thing. And some of these kind of like, some of these like, the Benghazi thing, that was a fucked up situation, but that was a witch hunt on the part of the Republicans. That guy, fucking weirdo in South Carolina, where there's a lot of weirdos, by the way. I used to live there, I know. Fucking prick-ass looking lawyer. He's on Fox News now, mostly because of Benghazi and a little bit of Russiagate in the beginning. God, I wish I remembered these people's names. The guy that looks like a little... let's just calm the language down a little bit, right? Let's pause this and let's get to... So, I don't know. Am I going to do this? I don't know if I want to do this video about Ukraine. This is just going to be a fucking rant. I did want to... I was looking at the... I was like, people really need to understand the history, the complete history of Ukraine. And I like using... maps are great, and this is just Google Maps. Google Earth. And... let's start with, let's look at this. So, if we talk about Ukraine, let's go classical era. Over here, what do you have over here? Herodotus talked about the Scythians. Not many people know about the Scythians, but that was just another name for sort of Mongol-type people and various nomadic peoples that were usually from Central Asia somewhere. So the Scythians had... Herodotus made them sound pretty fucking evil. I think, who knows? Herodotus was okay as a classical historian. He's not revered like Thucydides. Other ones like Tacitus, Josephus in Roman times. I like the guy that did the one on the Punic Wars between Rome and Carthage. He was not a contemporary source, but he's a good enough source for understanding the Punic Wars to some degree. So, we have sort of, I'm not an as far as mainstream lay historian stuff, there's not too much of note that I can remember around this time. I mean, I guess Alexander the Great, did he come over here? I don't think he really came up here much. So Alexander the Great didn't conquer. This area was just basically wild territory. And then, look, I'm not going to go history brainiac on you. Let's talk about Crusader Kings 2. This is why these video games were good video games. I'm glad that some of the youth like these video games. Crimea, or around Crimea, was one of the few places that you can start as a Jewish lord or duke over a Jewish territory. So in Crusader Kings 2, you have the Khazars, and there's like one province in the game. I'm not saying this is accurate per se, but there was one province in the game that was, you could start out either as a lord, a Jewish lord, or maybe even both the lord and the culture of that province were Jewish. And then you could do your achievement where you can take over a bunch of stuff and eventually reconquer the Holy Land, and it was a fun time. Except you had to play as a nomad type of government, which is kind of, yeah, I wasn't a big fan. You know, I was like playing one of the Catholic Europeans in the game because you got the most options. Why is this thing so laggy? I might as well turn this fucking video capture device off. Remove that. So, video capture. Let's pause it. Okay, so you don't hear much about that. You have the Khazars. Now, some people who are, let's say, Zionist a little bit, not that I have a problem with that, but they tend to be a little biased in some of their viewpoints on history. And there's a lot of people that refuse to acknowledge that there were Jewish nobles or tribal chieftains in this area. But we do have a smattering of evidence that would seem to indicate that coins were minted. Well, coins were minted. Quite a large amount of coins were minted with the Star of David on them. So it was likely that someone powerful in the area who maybe a lot of other lower level warlords owed fealty to and paid tribute to. So somebody there, someone with influence, maybe someone that had control of a trade center, you know, that person might have, you know, maybe his noble family or several noble families had converted to Judaism at some point. It's not out of the realm of possibility. As far as I know, others, I think the Azerbaijani, where is Azerbaijan? Somewhere is Azerbaijan, and it's nowhere near Israel. And I think that it is more of Azerbaijan. So there's a large, you know, demographic of Jewish people in Azerbaijani. The reason I bring this up is it's a very interesting sort of caveat to history that you had I guess a lot of people converting to Judaism in this area of the world. I would say around you have to go to Crusader Kings 2 and look at it. It's right there. Pick one of the timelines. One of those provinces is going to be blue. It's going to say Jewish. And you're like, wow, there's a Jewish place here. What's that about? And then you read into its Khazars. You know, I'm not a history professor here. I just know way more than a boiler mechanic should. And it's really probably not the best thing for me. Let's just put it that way. So after the Khazars, in between, so then you have the next period is when of Ukrainian history, when the Vikings, I wish it wasn't so laggy. So when the Vikings came down the Volga River, and then they sailed down here with their boats that had a bunch of oars on them so they can go down upriver. And they started, you know, slowly over hundreds of years. They finally started to come into this area, right? And they liked it. The Vikings liked it. To them, it was probably like almost tropical paradise level, you know. And they loved it because they could just go right down here and right down here. And look at this. This is beautiful from their perspective. They go right down here to Istanbul or Constantinople. Istanbul or Constantinople. Istanbul or Constantinople. I had to do it. Is Constantinople at the time, let's say around the turn of the first millennia, besides Baghdad, one of the richest cities in the world. Baghdad or maybe somewhere in southern Spain might have been richer. Maybe even Timbuktu, although I think they may have come later. So the Vikings would love to sail down here and just, you know, lay waste to the Byzantines, you know, for a while. Like, the Byzantines had no counter. They were unable to defend against the Vikings because they couldn't deal with such a mobile force. And the Vikings laid siege to Constantinople several times, as far as I know. And there was, or maybe they not laid siege, they laid siege at least a couple times. And they raided all over here and just took what they want. They would lay siege to the city, hold it for ransom. They would, like, you know, go kidnap women and rape them and, you know, then hold them for ransom. Like, if they didn't kill them, you know, it's hard times. These were hard times to live in, my friend. And then, the patriarch of Constantinople would come out and say, I pray to God, and, this is how the God will defeat the Vikings. And then all the people in Constantinople are watching. This is the very abridged, no bullshit version of this story. Then the patriarch would, I'm praying to God, and God will deliver us from the Vikings. The Vikings are, out here just making it impossible for anything. They controlled the sea lanes. Most importantly is that the Vikings were able to blockade all of the sea lanes, and then they would lay siege to the city. They were good at what they did. And here comes the patriarch, or at the time maybe it was called the Pope. I think it was called patriarch or something else. He would come out. He would come out and stand in front of everybody who was starving in Constantinople. And he would say, look, I'm praying. God will deliver us. And then, very, very quietly, secretly as possible, he handed a bunch of fucking money to the Vikings. He had to be secret about it because the people, if it was widespread knowledge that this was happening in some of these instances, the people might have wondered why they were allowed to starve for so long when they could have paid the Vikings off the whole time. Interesting little tidbit there. How does that relate to today, I wonder? I mean, do people behave any differently today? No. The political figures, public figures, have always been pretty corrupt, have always done shit like this, and they're doing it now. In many countries, these political figures are destroying their countries more or less through just incompetence, really bad. I don't buy I don't buy any controlled demolition theories. Human beings are not that fucking smart. They're just not. It's not, and any sort of coordinated scheme requires coordination, and that's hard to do the more people you add to any individual scheme. So you run into a problem where, with conspiracies, is they get to the point where the conspiracy is involving too many disparate groups of people whose interests don't always align. That's never going to work out. But incompetence, that's another matter. Incompetence, it's Murphy's Law. It's Murphy's Law. What can go wrong will go wrong, and what stupid decisions can be made will be made. And if such was the case. So the Vikings, back to the broader Ukraine history, the Vikings loved this little place here, or somewhere around here, probably not exact location, called Kiev. Yes, I'm going to say Kiev, just to piss people off. I hope it pisses people off. Why did they like Kiev? Well, look at this. This is perfect if you're a Viking. You can sail down if you wanted to, although really what happened is this movement, this spreading to this area takes over 100, 200 years. Relatively fast in historical terms, but they eventually like this spot. And this way they can park their boats here and further south, and then they can go out and they can raid Constantinople, or probably there's other cities here. I'm sure they were raiding the Tartars and Khazars in Crimea. At the same time that the Vikings are settling here, setting up their base of operations where they can invade, where they can basically rob Constantinople on a regular basis. You have people slowly moving from the east. They're being pushed by people further east. into these locations. One of them is the Tartars. They come a little later. You start seeing them, I would say, probably off the top of my head, 1100s, 1200s. I would say maybe a little before that, you had the Kumans. You had all these different sort of Central Asian people coming in here. Well, they come in here. The Vikings are here. The Vikings are attacking the Khazars. The Kumans and the Tartars are coming from the east. And the Khazars disappear relatively quickly. And then the Tartars and others, you know, they kind of get this whole area. Again, anybody who's played Crusader Kings 2, I mean, this is not genius level stuff. Just go play a game of Crusader Kings 2, and then you go. You understand at least the basics of ethnographic sort of migration stuff, activities. So the Tartars, like, you know, so you thought the Vikings were bad. The Tartars weren't very nice either. Well, nobody in those times was nice, generally speaking. You know, it was a brutal time to live, as I'll say again. Well, they were like, you know, we're going to attack up here because there's a bunch of these people. They call themselves Russians, and there's a kingdom of Kievan Rus. Okay, that was the kingdom that the Vikings eventually, it was the result of the Vikings settling along the river, and then Slavs in the surrounding areas, their cultures kind of semi-merging. And okay, and this is where you see the first nation state that can be called major nation state, that can be called Russian in identity. Besides, maybe, you know, you had some stuff here in Moscow region, but this was independent of Moscow. This is, you know, because the people mixed, you had the Vikings mixed with the Eastern Slavs over a couple of hundred years, and they just eventually start referring to themselves as Russian. This is what happens over time. People's identities change. They feel a different national identity, usually based on language factors and culture factors. In this area, the people here developed a distinct culture that was very distinct from the areas around it. It was a mixture of Varegarian, i.e. Viking, and Slav. And I think these would be called Eastern Slavs, because you have your Western Slavs over here, then you have your more Eastern Slavs over here, and Ukraine is kind of right in the middle. Okay, so, but the Tartars come in, and they're like, wow, these people, they're easy to enslave. So the Tartars just came in, and the others came in and just decimated these populations, more or less, between enslaving virtually everybody they could, murdering whoever they didn't like. Then you have the Mongol Empire fighting. Actually, one of the major battles of the Mongol conquest was against the armies of Kievan Rus. And actually, by the accounts I remember, Kievan Rus was able to really, in the surrounding areas, were able to put together a pretty massive army. I've heard different things. I've heard up to 1 million or 2 million, although I'm not so sure. But it was certainly one of the biggest armies raised at the time, but it wasn't a very cohesive one. It wasn't a very well-led one. History lesson number 1 of military history. The most important factor, the most decisive factor to determine the outcome of any war is leadership, i.e. individuals, exceptional people who have that je ne sais quoi, that ability to be master performers while at the same time being master executors. And by execute, I mean to, you know, complete a task, to actually finish a job, not to kill people, although that's part of it. It's kind of ironic that I chose that word. That wasn't intentional. And the Mongols at the time, their leadership hardened by not only the harsh culture that they originated from, but also hardened from their constant campaigns across the world, basically conquering the world. And I think, is it Ogedai or Subutai or one of these famous Mongol generals came here and with a massively against a massively larger enemy in terms of manpower, the Mongols wiped the floor with them with, excellent tactics and decisive leadership. And Kievan Rus, basically that was the end of it. I'm sure it existed a little while after that. But more or less it ended there. The Mongol Empire, Americans, the most important, although not really an impressive empire in terms of how long it lasted. It certainly changed the world in a big way, though. Easily as big of a, influential series of events as World War II. I don't think really there's much you can say against that. Mongol conquests wiped out 17% of the world's population by some estimates. Of course, we would never know the true value. That's probably a high-end estimate, but it was a significant population of the world, larger than the proportion of the world, I believe, that the Black Death killed. Mongol conquests were it wasn't one war, so you can't say it was the most destructive war. It was a series of wars over 100 years. Although, if you call the 100 Years' War between England and France a war, then I don't see why you couldn't call the Mongol conquests a single war. But they were earth-shattering, titanic. This was a titanic event that at once caused great devastation and at the same time elicited immense progress through its opening of trade across the world. The Mongols actually encouraged trade. They encouraged religious freedom, believe it or not. But then also they would just murder you just because they felt like it. So there's that. So you have to spend a little extra time. Whenever you introduce the Mongols into a historical narrative, you have to have fun with it. It's great. So Mongols come in. They wipe out Kievan Rus. Tartars come in. Actually, the Tartars might have been more of an offshoot of the Mongols. So the Mongols really come in first. And the Tartars were basically, I think, a fringe state or maybe a direct splinter state. They are Central Asian. They're similar to Mongols. Well, they came in and they had this area for a while. And basically, whatever the Mongols didn't kill when they came through, I think the Mongols got as far as Hungary in their conquests. Let's remember, Mongolia is way over here, right? You see where I'm right? See that Mongolia? And in the 1200s, 1100s, you got to remember, they went into Hungary. But they totally mopped the floor with Kievan Rus. I mean, it's actually one of the biggest, one of the most shocking upsets in history. Tartars come in, they enslave everybody. They kind of just like more hang out here because this is where all the money's at. You got good trade routes, but then, this area gets basically totally depopulated. You have the Tartars coming north, doing their thing. You have European states kind of like staying away because they're afraid of the Mongols. You have Moscow, they were probably ruled by the Mongols. At least they were paying tribute to the Mongols at this time. So you can call them an extension of the Mongols, even though they were the culture, they weren't all murdered like but a lot of Kievan Rus. A little pocket of what you would call Ukraine today, which was really more like Russian Ukraine in terms of its actual identity instead of Ukraine at that time. And I'm going to get into, I mean, most people should know this, but I'm going to get into when that changed. There was little pockets of Ukraine, and they were in contact with Moscow, with the other Russian states, and there was trade, there was a lot of stuff there. So they became more similar than different over time. Then the Tartars kind of burned themselves out. The Byzantine Empire is now gone. We're talking like 1300. Maybe most of it, the Byzantine Empire is gone. I guess you still have probably Constantinople there until about the 1500s. But you know, most of the Byzantine Empire is gone. Everything's splintering up. The Tartars just stay down here. And you have a big area of no man's land in the middle, like right here. This whole area was kind of like a no man's land because it was very dangerous, because you had the Tartars and what's left of the Mongols coming in from these directions, just killing and enslaving and robbing everybody. You still have little elements of Kievan Rus here, although they kind of just stayed here, you know. You had the Ottomans coming through sometimes. I think the Ottomans are starting to show up, although we may not be talking about until maybe later on, for about 1600. So I'm not sure when they come in. Maybe 1600s. I don't know. The timelines I never get completely right. The sequence is correct. And then what you have is something very interesting happening. So, and there's very good videos on this, so I'll just say this briefly. So, you know, things in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, could have always been better. I mean, at that time. You know, there's a lot of problems, and people just like started like coming out of this area, which at the time wasn't Poland, but this was, I believe, Romania and Hungary over here. And these people just started saying, hey, look, I heard there's like some empty land. Just like nobody's there, right? And so people like from Europe just started hearing about this, and they just started like, you know, making little forays into this area. You know, at first just coming in, you know, and eventually coming in, robbing some people or doing trade or whatever. It's usually either one or the other. And then they'd go back. It was mostly men, and they would go back home to their families in the winter. And this was a thing that was going on for some time, a couple hundred years, and that was the origin of the Cossacks, right? So the Cossacks came in, and they started eventually, instead of going back to Europe, they would settle in Ukraine. They started having these settlements. They were bringing their families, and they were integrating with what was left of the Slavic people here, which there were still considerable people scattered around. They weren't completely exterminated. You know, the Mongols weren't able to commit, you know, they didn't intend to commit genocide. They just killed everybody who opposed them. They didn't care what, you know, they weren't intending to wipe out people, but they weren't, you know, they didn't wipe out all of the Slavs in this area. So you have just this kind of chaotic Wild West situation. You're talking 15, 1600s and into the 1700s, I would say. 16 and 7, I would say the height of this, probably 15, I would say 1600s. And these Cossacks were a very, very unique culture that were independent and not really Russian, not really, you know, Tartar. I'm sure they didn't get along with them. Not really Polish or Romanian anymore, because these people had already lived in Ukraine for generations. They formed this really cool society. So anybody can look into that. And there's good videos on YouTube. I'm not an expert on it, but just look into Cossacks. So what ended up happening is the Cossacks actually started to get powerful. They were known as good warriors. Long story short, they fight with the Ottomans. They fight with the Principality of Moscow, or whatever it was called, Muscovy at the time. And there you go. That's more Paradox games. You can learn about. You can, you know, get the basic idea of that. Just play Europa Universalis or Crusader Kings 2. And as far as understanding the geography of these events, that's as good a source as any, as far as I'm concerned, to get the broad picture. So they're fighting with everybody. And eventually Moscow wisens up and they say, you know, we don't like the Ottomans, because now the Ottomans are getting powerful. It's probably 1700s, 1600s by now. We don't like the Ottomans. The Cossacks don't like the Ottomans. Now, the Cossacks are really good mercenaries. Now, sometimes they fight us, sometimes we fight them, but they also fight the Ottomans a lot. So Moscow is like, hey, can we hire? So after probably 100 years of pretty intense, maybe a low intensity type war, but there was some higher intensity situations. Basically a constant state of war for 100 years. And then the Moscow wisens up and they say, you know, we are not so different. You know, you guys speak a Slavic-ish language. Maybe not, I'm not sure. But some people did in that area. And Polish, and these were all Slavic. They were as Polish. These Hungarian's kind of its own separate thing. It's not a Slavic language, but a lot of these people from these areas that migrated into this area and established the Cossack sort of civilization, if you want to call it that, there were plenty of Slavic speakers. So Moscow's like, you know, we want to hire you. Let's stop fighting. We're just going to give you money so you don't steal it from us, and we're going to hire you to attack the Ottomans for us. And that was actually a good move on their part, and it worked. And that's where you see Ukraine once again, after depopulating somewhat, then get repopulated and kind of reintegrate into what has always been considered a Russian sort of identity. And of course, like everywhere else, you know, the map wasn't the same then, and these areas would have been Poland, Belarus. I don't know if Belarus was its own thing, but you know, you have Europa Universalis 4 players. You have the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and you have Austria-Hungary coming in. So this area, even though, you know, it got repopulated, reintegrated with a Russian-ish identity, and it was at the time considered a Russian identity, you still had disputed regions, and you had Hungary intruding and conquering parts of this area at times. You had Poland, what was then called either the Kingdom of Poland, Kingdom of Lithuania. Lithuania actually had a big swath of this land. I'm not sure how far down it went, but Lithuania for generations. And if you know, when a country establishes control over an area for generations, and even if they're not especially oppressive, you're going to see, if it's, you know, a successful conquest, you're going to see shifting in identities to that of the conqueror slowly over time. This is what always happens. So Western Ukraine, as it is now, was more Lithuanian, Polish, Hungarian, Romanian, etc., etc. And the eastern part, usually it's considered east of the Dnieper, was always considered to identify more with Russia. You know, it's almost like many countries in the Middle East. Iraq is one of the best examples. Ukraine should probably never have existed as it does now, I would say. I mean, I think a more viable Ukrainian state would have been along the Dnieper. The big dispute there has always been Odessa. The Russians won Odessa, and it was traditionally a Russian city. Its history and its traditions are more Russian than what we would call Ukrainian, which is really Lithuanian and Polish and Hungarian and Romanian all mixed up. But it's mixed and established to the point where it's a unique culture. There is a Ukrainian culture. Ukrainian language is a different language from Russian, although I'm not an expert on those languages. I hear they're hard as fuck to learn. I want to learn. I would like to learn either or. I would pick Russian, obviously, because I'm a Putin puppet. I want to be puppeteered by Putin. So, yeah, so Ukraine is a viable state, but I just think that It should have been post 1991, probably east of the Dnieper would have been the best way to do this with the least problems and the fairest way to do that. But of course, the Americans weren't concerned about what's fair and what's sustainable. The neoconservatives in America are mostly concerned with what they want right now. That's what they're concerned with. What do I want right now? How do I feel about this? My feelings matter the most. As if I'm a neocon right now, I'm thinking, you know, oh man, that Ukraine. Well, how do I feel about that? Oh, I feel angry. Well, that means I'm going to do angry things. That's how a neocon thinks. So, Western Ukraine and even going into up here in this region, all of this, especially Western Ukraine, would be, I would, you know, Odessa should be, if we were being absolutely honest with ourselves, we would have Odessa probably as the furthest east city of Russia, most likely, besides Kaliningrad or whatever. You would have a border, something like maybe using Moldova as the eastern border. I don't know. It'd be kind of weird. It's kind of hard because, you know, Odessa kind of sticks out. But easily, at least the Dnieper River should be the baseline for the eastern border of Russia, if we were being real. And the reason we're in this, the most serious war of the 21st century so far, the reason we're in this war is because there's things that the United States wasn't really, you know, willing to compromise over, like anything, basically. I mean, our neocons aren't willing to compromise over anything. I don't know where they get this idea that they don't have to compromise with other major powers, but they'll find out that's not going to work. Okay, we're finding that out now. But then, you know, the Russians really want Odessa, and that's something there where I think they should be willing to budge on that. I think that Odessa is going to be a big sticking point politically for Putin. I have my doubts if they're going to take it. I think base case with Russia, I think I got the whole history pretty good, though. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the 20th century. We basically went up to the 19th century where, you know, the Russian Federation the Russian Empire has a lot of Ukraine, but not all of it. And it does have Odessa, and that's why they want Odessa back. But I don't think they're going to get it. I don't think they are going to press. I don't think, well, who knows? With the way these things are going, a lot can change very quickly. I mean, I think the Ukrainian regime is a lot weaker than even some of its fiercest critics understand it to be. I think we're going to find out when the dust settles that, indeed, 70% of the aid, the weapons, of everything that was sent to Ukraine was embezzled. This may be one of the biggest scams in terms of just the sheer amount of money being siphoned off. One of the biggest scams in history. It's really tragic because, you know, hundreds of thousands of people already, at least 150 to 200,000 people, mostly military men, have died over this scam. I find it really reprehensible, and it's terrifying that our government here in the United States, it's terrifying to me that they would engage in such a scam. Never forget, they would be perfectly willing, if it was in their interests, to do what they're doing in Ukraine. If it were in their interest, they would do that or something similar to you and me, the American citizen. And by they, I mean not any particular group, just, you know, interests can, you know, come together in a confluence of tacit agreements that can set into motion policies and situations perpetrated by our government on our own people in the United States, similar things. press gangs. You think there's already been press gangs in the United States many times. So never forget that. I mean, if they were willing to fake a gas attack in Syria, which they really tried hard to do and they failed because government's usually incompetent, thank God. But they tried to, where is it, Duma? One of these big cities? I don't know which one. It looks like a beautiful country. I really want to visit it. And I think I will. This one I have to visit. It'd be very dangerous. Well, I don't know. I think maybe the East, all the places here might not be so dangerous. I want to go to Syria. You heard it here first. I might go to Syria this year. Okay, so if they're willing to fake a gas attack in Syria, our government and the UK government in concert with private actors, PR firms, and public intelligence agencies, and all sorts of different weirdos, they faked a gas attack in Syria. Now, what makes you think that if they were willing to fake a gas attack in Syria, maybe they would try it in D.C. or New York? Maybe these weirdos would try to fake a gas attack in Boston, Los Angeles, wherever. If they were willing to do it in Syria, it stands to reason that they would be willing to do something like that in the United States. If they thought or believed, they believe some crazy things, mind you, if they believed that they could get away with it and that they would work out in their interest. Right now, as we speak, I was going to talk about this great article from Swiss Policy Research. Let me pause it real quick. Relit my pipe. This great article. Probably the best, most comprehensive, and most fair article of any of the sources I routinely look at. And there's some places where they get it kind of wrong. And then they get a lot right. And they're fair. And they don't use like the ridiculous Ukraine death estimates of like some people are saying 250,000. They're not going that extreme. They use mostly good sources. They get a few things wrong. I think that in this article, they kind of give the Ukrainians more help in terms of what they think their total readiness is at this moment. Here we have, they cite an article saying, well, while Russia's been attacking Donbass, Ukraine's been really building up on the northern border. And I have no doubt that there is some buildup on the northern border. But I think that mostly this is a lot of money being siphoned off elsewhere. I mean, it's pretty much a big money laundering scam. So I'm not sure that, first of all, the article he cites, Los Angeles Times, heavy on the innuendo, by the way. But overall, and so I think they kind of say, well, maybe they're thinking Ukraine's northern border is a bit too, they're giving it too much credit. Let's just put it that way. They're saying that, Ukraine's really, in all these months, Ukraine has been really putting a lot of that foreign aid to good use and really building up the defenses. I highly doubt that. And, by the way, they had very heavy defenses in, I'm not going to even zoom into Bakhmut because everybody's zooming into Bakhmut these days. It's going to be somewhere over by Donetsk. So, these areas have been getting fortified for 8 years, and Russia is still breaking through them still with relatively few casualties compared to the Ukrainians. That much I am sure of. And we have to remember, by the way, the Wagner group that everybody talks about is not a huge force. You're talking, I think, less than 10,000 combat-ready soldiers. And they've been, punching up to 10 times their body weight in terms of manpower, as far as I can tell. This is just an honest assessment, folks. And they give some of the weapons systems, like they give the Stinger missile, I think, and the Javelin especially, a bit too much credit for being a game changer. They call in this Swiss Policy Research article, they call the HIMARS a game changer. I mean, that I can see more of the argument there. It depends on what your definition of a game changer is. Do you mean a slight game changer or a total game changer? It can be seen, the HIMARS can be seen as a slight game changer, but I don't think I'm not seeing too many HIMARS launches. So either they're running low on HIMARS launchers because they're getting destroyed, or maybe they're conserving the missiles. I'm not sure. Stockpiling the missiles. But so there's certain things that Swiss Policy Research gets wrong. Things they get right, as far as I can tell. The impact of the economic sanctions, they leave it open that it remains to be seen if the economic sanctions against Russia are going to succeed. But I can feel a strong leaning towards in their intonations that they are leaning towards these economic sanctions not working. And they point out correctly that the economic sanctions have so far been mostly negative for the West, more than Russia. And we have to let's not forget, China may or may not come out strong from the COVID, the dumb COVID lockdowns, but I think they kind of exaggerate in the Western media just how expansive those lockdowns were. I mean, they locked down major cities, but the vast majority of the population, as far as I've heard, haven't been locked down per se. Now, I'm not saying that I would want to live under. Well, see, I couldn't say I wouldn't want to live under it unless I lived there, right? So I'm not going to be an American and speak on things, an American civilian, and speak on things I have no idea about. All I'm saying is, it gives me a little pause, some of the images I've seen, but also, National Endowment for Democracy, is National Endowment for Democracy. So there's that. So, let's not forget that the PMI came out relatively strong last week. China PMI at something like 58. And what's great about that for Russia is that the United States needs China to reopen strong. And Russia could take advantage of that. And I just can't get over the crying that was going on a couple months ago when China announced a mere 5% yearly GDP growth. And all of these grifters and charlatans in the United States who are, on the one hand, threatening China, on the other hand, they're waiting in the wings to ride the wave of asset speculation upward once again in China. And that's going to end up working out well for Russia, I think, in that China will start to suck in those raw materials. And this is going to be the best deal ever for China. This could be massive. This could be extremely robust development. I think that it seems to me that they had a tepid estimation of their future growth over there in China because they don't want to attract too many more American grifters and British grifters. So there's that. So Swiss policy research kind of, implies that Russia has the sanctions. The only thing they say in there, somewhere in here, is that the Russian their revenue from energy, I guess maybe just energy, maybe just natural gas. Let me see if I could find it. What they say. So, energy prices and Russian export volumes have declined substantially, which posed serious financial challenges to the Russian state in 2023 and beyond. Well, I think they're overestimating the impact of the pure energy sales. Now, it is a significant source of government revenue, but, they had low energy sales before 2015, 16, probably 18, somewhere around there when energy prices were very low, 2020, and they pulled through it just fine. And the thing about Russia that's different from the United States is they tend to focus on doing as much as they can with as little resources as they can. They're much more practical in the way they solve their problems generally, especially problems of a national security type. So that's just been their doctrine since World War II. I think I need to get done with this rant soon. But let's not forget, going back to one thing I said earlier, which is what matters most in a war. It's not advanced weapons. Guess who had advanced weapons? Guess who had the most advanced weapons of the 20th century in a major war relative to other countries? It was Germany, and they lost. China, Russia, and even the United States at the time focused on practical engineering to solve these problems that they faced in the war. And also, most importantly, they had, both United States and Russia had huge industrial capacity. Let's go to another paradox game. Am I admitting too much that too much of my historical education is from paradox games? I don't know. I mean, I do read history book. I do read history's primary sources, secondary sources. But yeah, I admit it. Let's not forget what the main component, one of the top main components in your Hoi 4 game is. It is industrial capacity. Right now, just two things. I talked about leadership earlier and why it's important. And I could show you one example of it after another of why leadership is so important. The United States has none at the moment. We seem to be in a real deep crisis in leadership. And the other thing we don't have is we don't have the industrial capacity. People point to 1940s and how, they think that all these factories magically came out of the ground, out of nowhere, and built tanks. No, those factories, the infrastructure was there because during the 1920s, boom, you had a huge infrastructure develop. And one of the fastest instances of industrial growth in the entire history of the world would be the United States in the very end of the latter 20 years of the 18th century through the 1920s. By 1940, those factories, even if they had closed down during the Great Depression, they were still there. Okay. So they were relatively easily made into factories that could produce weapons. Russia also had its own industrialization. And looky who comes out on top after World War II. The two nations with the largest industrial capacities. And not the best technology. The Germans had the best technology as far as military technology was concerned. So this idea that, as they say here, HIMARS, how many HIMARS missile launchers did they get? 20, 30, something like that? I think it was something like that. That's not going to be a game changer You need many more platforms if they were effective, which they appear to have been effective. The problem is, how many of those can the United States produce for Ukraine? Ukraine can't produce any. 20 is not going to make a difference. But they do a good job here talking about the Leopard tanks and how they're not going to be useful. And so far, I think Ukraine's gotten like 17 of them. And I've heard that the person that gave them the tank, the government that gave them the tanks, told them not to send them to the front. Just keep them, put them on TV, show it to the people, but don't send them over there because we don't want them to get destroyed and reverse engineered, et cetera, But, you know, they correctly point out that this is essentially a large component of this war is a trade war and an energy war. So they talk about the Minsk agreement and how the United States was a bad faith actor in that. Most of Europe was, well, some people in Europe were allegedly bad faith actors. They point out correctly that the United States and Great Britain scuttled a potential beginning of a peace agreement in March or April 1914. People have to be constantly reminded by that. Taking that peace agreement then might have saved at least 100,000 lives, I would say, being very conservative. So, you know, they do good at showing how their Swiss policy research is one of the best for debunking some of the more advanced propaganda that we are hit with. They're good at really kind of slicing and dicing this stuff. Well, it's more of a general overview. You have to dig a little deeper, but it's really good. They do good at showing propaganda. Right up my alley. I knew some PSYOPs people. Speaking of PSYOPs, since we're just doing this on a summary of the Ukraine War 2023, the Kherson withdrawal. So that was interesting because what a lot of people don't appreciate is that was actually a very well executed battlefield tactical level PSYOPs operation on the part of the Russians. One thing that the Russians have shown, I have to say, is they have very good control of the information. They have decent control of counter infiltration, decent measures against infiltration of their intelligence apparatus. And they've been able to keep the enemy guessing in terms of what their plans are. I think planning is very well controlled and protected. It seems like the intelligence services seem to be pretty professional. And as someone who has some, life experience there, not that I was in any of them, just saying life experience. They seem to be a well put together outfit. There was, I guess, I've seen problems over the last year. Some people getting fired here and there. Doesn't seem like any of these people are too influential to be fired, which I'm sure some of them are. But I think that it looks like the intelligence operations being well run. That'll probably bring to people's minds the quote journalist. The more I hear about that, the more I think, the guy either fell for an entrapment scheme, which he should have known better, or he was actually working for an intelligence agency here in the U.S. or Britain. The Wall Street Journal reporter looks like they did a sting operation on him, and he agreed to illegally meet with, what he thought would be informants for him. And so it seemed like he at least took the bait. I'm not saying it's right for people to get entrapped. I don't like it when they do it here in the United States, and I can't endorse it when the Russians do it if that's what they did. But Kherson was a very well executed strategic withdrawal with very well done battlefield PSYOPs. They kept the people were guessing. They didn't know if the Russians were stay or were going to go. They did something similar to, like, the D-Day tricks that were pulled, with the fake armies and all of these signals that the United States leaked out to Germany to get them to think they were going to land in a different space. Russians did something like that, a little, not nearly as complicated as the D-Day operation, which I forget the name of the operation, but they did keep the Ukrainians guessing and the United States guessing, more importantly, as to whether they were planning to stay or go. They even went so far as to build fake fortifications. They did a lot of cool stuff. And this is, when people use the word psyops. No, this is actually real psyops. Those things that we point to a lot of times are psyops, but this is psyops in its purest sense. This is kind of the genesis psyops, to use them on the battlefield, to use psyops on the battlefield, like when the Mongolians, flung dead bodies over the walls of the city they were besieging. Other countries did that too, like Vladimir the Impaler, impaling tens of thousands of Ottoman troops and putting them along the road on the way so that all the Ottomans could see it. He scared the shit out of the Ottomans. They fled in horror. That's a psyop. And this Kherson withdrawal was also an excellent psyop. They appeared to have managed to have withdrew, I think, 30,000 troops, something like 5,000 vehicles across 3 crossing lanes across the Dnieper River. And let's say, to be very conservative, maybe a month, but it could have been as little as 2.5 weeks that they moved something like 30,000 troops across 3 points of contact, keeping everybody guessing on what they were going to do. That was, in my opinion, an impressive, very impressively executed and planned operation. And I'm not saying all of the Russian operations were well planned or executed, but that was really, I think that will be studied in the future, at least in Russian military schools. Very well done. And Surovikin deserves credit for that. Very good. So I see the Russian leadership overall being better than anything that exists in the United States. There may be some elements within Ukraine that are more nationalistic and therefore more extreme and crazy, like Japanese style and crazy, like kill yourself rather than be surrendered crazy. You see a little bit of that I think that kind of attitude's dying, but you're seeing a little bit of that. There's a lot of fucked up shit going on in Ukraine. We all know that. But I see the planning. The United States, which is managing this war, hasn't had a plan from the beginning. They didn't do a plan B for the economic sanctions. I can go on and on. I think I got to stop the rant there. But anyway, that is my disjointed but authentic rant on the Ukraine situation, and I did a little history, and this would be just something to put out there. Yes, I don't hate the boomers, I promise, but I have to let the boomers know. I know I went off on the boomers earlier. Forgive me, boomers. But a lot of people are annoyed with you. Nobody hates you. There's not going to be anything crazy going on, but you guys need to stop watching TV or shut up. I think I'm out. See ya.